Hello, Isaac.
Oh, Rabbi, good evening. Happy Purim.
Happy Purim to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
On this exciting day, I thought it would be before we get started of any text, I thought I'd be excited to take note of the fact that we passed 50 interactions, 50 sessions, and on average, we probably do around 1 point something verses each time. We still haven't finished chapter 4 as we pass 50, but I thought it'd be a great time to kind of take note of what we've gone through. And specifically, I feel as a Jew, I didn't really have any preconceived notions, as you hear throughout, about how we should understand this text. But I thought it'd be interesting to like maybe note some of the either preconceived notions that have transitioned or different ways that you've been understanding the text or things that you've gotten out of the text that you maybe wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or just some ideas. So to get started, has anything struck you
Well,
from our sessions that maybe you haven't been struck up before through your earlier investigations of Matthew?
well, Rabbi, that's a very loaded question. That's like asking Isaac, what's the best food in the world? But before we start, Rabbi, I should say thank you. We started out saying, let's see where this goes, and I can imagine we finished 50 videos. So I can't thank you enough for your time, conversation, sharing, and sharing insights. This has been the high point of my day. And so to your question, right? It's hard to pick one thing. There are quite a few things which stand out. The fact that
Anything
you know
you want, Isaac.
yeah, so these are things which come to mind without any preparation, which just come from the top of my head, which is the first thing is that to look at Jesus as a son of Abraham and David. I think that forms the basis of everything he does and of everything he is, and kind of how this fits with the overall theme, as in we see divine intervention from the get-go, as in the angel showed up to Mary, and then we saw the Magi, they show up, a star shows up, and how that God over the years has moved through different people. One of the things we discussed is these magi were pagan people. When I mean pagan, they were they were non-Jewish. They believed in what do you call it, in astrology, but God was able to work through them. And one of my biggest points, or one of the things which stood out to me, was we discussed Herod being that crazy guy, power hungry, corrupt guy, but somehow how the story fits again in that context too, when people felt helpless, that God was able to work in that context to show his purposes. Now I start with the assumption or with the basis that there was something special about Jesus. I can't explain it. I can't logically like show this is. I start with the axiom that Jesus was both the Son of God and the Son of Man. But I think that's given me more context as I'm looking at that from the context of Abraham and David. Um, as we fast forward further, I was so moved by the analogy between Jesus and Moses. It's something I'd never heard before, where you said, right, like when the initial Jewish audience would have heard this, to them Moses was the biggest prophet because he had seen God, or because he gave the commandments. And the way in which you laid out where that the evangelist was trying to say that somebody bigger than Moses is here. The parallels between them fleeing from Israel to Egypt and Egypt to back, and the other specifics were there. So that stood out to me. Wow, I would have never seen Jesus as being a type or a bigger person than Moses. But through the verses, as we looked at it, that made it that gave it more context and more grounding, or it kind of fit it helped me understand the Old Testament, the Old Testament, and with the New Testament. And then John was remarkable. I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around this guy. As you've noticed, he was an extraordinary revolutionary, and I do not know from how he got these ideas in his head. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And speaking of John and Jesus, so far I've looked at Jesus as John as a precursor to Jesus. But as you've said, Jesus builds on John's theology, and so we have to look at Jesus. I mean, not necessarily look at John as only a precursor, but to look at the life of Jesus as in Jesus building on the theology of John. Like, Jesus does not say there is no place where Jesus takes down or changes John's theology. In fact, his first sermon was repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's word for word. And I think, and so there's a mystery to John. I'm still grappling with that. I don't have the full context yet as to how to understand this person who lived in the desert, or who lived in the wilderness and had these crazy ideas, revolutionary ideas, which in some ways have, was as you said, was the foundation for Jesus and his ministry. Fast forward then, the Sophists. Oh my gosh, that is the highlight of it all, right?
Oh, really? You're a big Sophist fan.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the,
Have you studied like some more Greek sophistry and the history of it, or just what we've discussed?
well, at this point, it's only what we've discussed. I haven't, maybe at some point I'll dig deeper into it. I haven't got into this yet. So at this point, it's trying to, so it's one thing to be aware of it. It's another thing for that to shape my mind, to kind of, to get a better handle on this, and I can't say it's something instantaneous. It's something which grows little by little, day by day, as I think about this. I've read, I've read the three temptations of Christ and the bread, and you fall down and worship me. But the way we, when we looked at this through the context of the Old Testament, or the exact verses and what the verses meant, and why exactly these three temptations. One was sophist, the second one saying, fall down, as to will Jesus use his power for his physical safety, and thirdly, bow down and worship me. Um, so I don't want to say that, I've learned, that I fully understand them all. So much of this is, it does stretch my mind. What it's taught me is a deeper awareness to read each word, or to read the word, or to read the word, or to read the word closely. So
Yeah,
that's
I feel like this is something that when I've read things with Christians before, a lot of times it's almost anathema. It's so out of the norm to kind of have a Talmudic focus. And I'll be honest, the amount of time that we're focusing on a verse is nothing compared to the Talmud. The Talmud will spend page after page on a word. The medieval commentaries will argue for 1,000 years about who a person is. So that's definitely something. Let me
yeah.
ask you.
And can I just add one more thing? And now I'm at a place where I'm trying to understand Peter and Simon Peter and Simon Peter and Andrew. I looked at fishermen as they were just fishermen. I didn't know the context of, again, based on the text you read, on the Talmudic text, where they were probably people of means, and that they owned a net and they had access to this. That gives us a different context, or it gives more color to the text and to who they were, and to the decisions they made, and the decisions they made since then, as in to follow Jesus. And so yeah, um, that's my, well. So I can't thank you enough. And
Okay.
these are my things which come to mind from my, unprepared conversations on what stands out
Yeah.
on our first 50
So,
discussions.
so let
Right.
me ask you one thing that wasn't always trying to do, but definitely recently, since we started the disciple stories of the call of the first disciples and the fishing stories, at least, is I've been trying to bring in a little bit more rabbinic texts. And I'd love
hmm
to hear how you feel that's been fleshing out or clarifying or maybe confusing the Christian text.
So to me, it's been refreshing because, so I mean, when we discussed Jeremiah 16:16, I had never known that a verse like this existed. I'm kind of embarrassed to say
Well,
that.
I mean,
Like,
the Christian commentator, I'll be honest, that was the Christian commentators
yeah,
noted that similarity. So that was just because you got to investigate a little more.
yeah. So the fact that even a verse like this existed, as in comparing fishing and hunting, um, I mean, I've got to be honest. So it's been refreshing, as in, so much of, I'd say, Christian theology has been looking at Jesus, as in starting with the Old Testament. It's been more Pauline focused, and it's only in this last few months, of the last, I should say, in less than the last 1 year, is when I've learned to appreciate Matthew, and that it's not antinomianistic, or how different Matthew is from Paul's gospel. And I think this is more of a lifelong journey. And Matthew sits, so, I mean, I think I probably mentioned this first time we spoke, where Matthew fits exactly within Judaism, but with a different, again, without, but with a no, but placing Jesus at the center. And so to me, it's been stretching my mind, as in, um, to study the Gospel of Matthew, and it's been a journey I've been on for the last few months. And now looking at this through the text of through the rabbinical text. Um, now I on my own, I wouldn't know where to look up the Talmud, where to look up all of this. But then to have somebody, as you talk this through, it does again. It's hard to explain. It gives the words more context. It makes the word come alive. And thank you for keeping up with some of my Christian questions sometimes, but that's just that's just what it is. But um, when you said right, so when you said last time, um, there were two strands within Judaism. These two rabbis, one of them was focused on the belief system, and the other one was focused on the acts. And
Oh,
I'm
are you talking
just
Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his laser eyes? Is that what you're saying? Because that was when he came out of the cave. Is that what you're mentioning?
No, 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 not the laser eyes. This is something we discussed, I think, last week, where that within the Talmud there were this rabbi felt that if somebody's on the deathbed and they did something good, right, or they
Oh,
believed
that.
in something. Yeah, so that gave me context to how even Paul can even come up with something called or even that Paul could even, come up with this theology of just belief system. Now, some ways to look at Paul, taking aspects of that and to address a specific, issue of his time with Gentiles becoming Christians. Um, but Matthew's gospel is so focused on people living a life worthy of the gospel and worthy of the gospel as he is with Jesus and who he is. So these Talmudic texts, they make the verse come alive. It's not just mere facts, but how this fits with the prophets of the Old Testament, and with the and with the Old Testament. So that is, yes, yeah, it's enriched my life. I can't explain. I mean, I can't say because of this I know this. It's more, is to have that more richer experience of God and who He is. Um,
So one of the things that we focus on, I feel, is to analyze gospel parallels. And while we very rarely mention John, and let alone Peter, sorry, let alone anything that Paul did, but we regularly talk about Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I was wondering if that
mhm.
you found that enlightening, heresy, historically inaccurate, or helpful.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for that question. So now, until we had these conversations, I wasn't. It had not sunk into my head that Mark was written prior to Matthew, or Matthew, or the Gospel of Matthew was written sometime after the Gospel of Mark, and this was shaped by that. And I was probably aware of it, or I knew it, but it was not something I actually thought about. But from our conversations, I've learned to place Matthew. It's been helpful to see how Matthew differs from Mark, and in what way it differs from Mark. And this is more of a lifelong journey, I should say. I mean, this is like me, a newborn person, just reading scriptures for the very first time through through fresh eyes, or not reading at this primarily through the lens of Pauline theology.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I feel that you've struggled with is trying to understand when history is taking place versus when it's just prophecy being fulfilled, and that this is
Yeah, no,
right.
that's something. Yeah, yeah, that's
So
I'm
I'd
still.
love to hear how you feel like your journey is going. That this is something that Christians who ever study the whole gospel always struggle with to understand specifically. I've heard as much as 80% of the gospel is really historical fiction that's made up in order to prove a point. And at the most, we generally say 80% maybe is history and 20% is made up. But no one believes, just when you see the gospels, no one believes that there's not additional elements, especially when you compare Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So I'd love to hear how you've struggled or come to terms with the historicity of the text.
One of my favorite questions is like, did this really happen? And I've probably asked this multiple times. How much of this
Probably.
is just evangelists saying something to embellish the fact, um, to show that Jesus is a Messiah versus something which actually happened. On the topic of prophecy, right? Um, yeah. I- it's something I can't say I have. I can't say I have um, Part of this is I start with I start with the axiom that Jesus is God, and there's been this tendency where we just overlook things and only go to what Jesus did as parables, what he said. But now it's been a journey of seeing how he fits within this broader, of how Jesus fits by being the son of Abraham and David, how he fits within that. Now, by saying that, he's being placed within promises and certain prophetic statement, prophetic things made in the Old Testament, right? And that's more a journey, I should say. It's something I'm becoming aware of, um, versus not just looking at Jesus and conduct and the social gospel.
Okay, this is great. So Isaac, maybe once we hit 100, we'll try to see where we're at again. But until then,
So let me ask you this: what's it been for you as a Jewish rabbi to study the Gospel of Matthew? I for a reason thought earlier today that you've probably become more that you've adopted the theology of John the Baptist. I said, doesn't Sabbath
well,
start?
when I took, I took a lot of New Testament studies when I was in a master's student at FIU, as well as Dead Sea Scroll studies. So I feel like I studied a lot. I was very prideful of the fact that I got the highest grade on the midterm or final on the midterm, I believe, in my New Testament class when I took it at master's. But I remember when I was studying for it, all the Christians were like memorizing verses and saying, try to say, John said this, Peter said, and I literally never tried to do anything like that. I never tried to have like a very strong grasp of New Testament because I've always felt that my only goal of knowing New Testament stuff is in order to like either repudiate Christians or in order to make sure that I could understand it from its Jewish context. So especially when I was studying Dead Sea Scrolls, it's very important to kind of understand the different ideologies around. And when Josephus mentions three, he doesn't mention Christians at that time because I guess that's a bit of a later movement. But it's always so important when you're trying to understand Pharisees and Sadducees to kind of eventually talk about the Christian movement. And especially once you get to like, to Talmudic studies, they do have Christian references when they weren't edited out forcibly out of the Talmud. So I think as a Jew, we always want to kind of understand what Christians say in order to put things into historical context and or to repudiate it. I mean, I used to have Christians come to my door, probably Mormons, though I guess not Christians, but people who are Jesus followers. And they come to my door, Jehovah's Witnesses, and they say, do this, do that, blah, blah. And I think there's an expectation that we should be educated about why, as a Jew, why they're wrong, why they're misquoting verses, why they take things out of context. And I think that a lot of times Jews don't take the time to do that. So for me to go through Matthew, like I'm definitely trying to view it more historically, like who would be the one who would write this text? What are the attitudes that we could cull from this text about first century either Judaism and or about movements that are anti-Jewish? So I feel like, again, like I'm not like on a religious journey. Like, I feel like you're on a religious journey. Like I don't view this as like a religious journey for me. Like I think that I would have the same feeling reading this as I would have the Quran, or if I had a Gnostic text of the first century. For me, if anything, the most exciting element of this is that there's three. Mark, you just compare, contrast, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for creativity to understand what's happening behind the text. And I think, like, again, like I don't view myself as an expert in Christianity, but when I look at the early church fathers and what they wrote on some of these things, or when I look at what various pastors or ministers are speaking today, a lot of times I think like what I see in the text is not what any of them saw, because I think I'm able to put my Jewish beer goggles on and or my historical beer goggles on and say, what does fish mean to a fisherman in that century? And we have text, let's look it up. So I think that like my attitude will at least allow for more creativity, but I think if you're a Christian, it leads to a lot more heresy in that I'm not trying to prove anything about Jesus, and I'm trying to like let the text guide me in a early Martin Luther way, not in the later, not in the later days, but like in an early way, say like, let me try to hear what the Gospels are saying and not make up stuff. Because one of the banes of the Jewish world, especially Talmudically, is when people make up stuff. There's this idea called pshat, which means a simple interpretation of text. And I think one of our goals is to try to figure out what's happening behind the text. Why did the author originally write that? So for me, this has been, I guess, a fun to try to figure out, why this is taking place. What
Yeah.
does that mean? And especially our last story that we had with the two stories of fishermen, where I feel like, as you said, it feels like poetry. I think for me, it's so obvious that this was once two stories. And I think it's like, I don't know who says that. I'm sure someone said it somewhere, but I think it's exciting to try, like, because I don't know enough academically. It's great to see some of these stories and figure them out.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so last year this time, I didn't even know what the word antinomianism meant. We
Oh my
probably said
God.
anti,
Next, you tell me you don't know what Martin Luther King went,
so
Martin Luther went through.
yeah, so it's been a journey since then. It's been a journey since then, and I think you bring up a good point. Christians, I think it's fair to say, culturally, generally speaking, we tend to focus more upon, you know, again, what Jesus did, his parables, and not so much about some of the underlying context of who, what, how he came, and kind of how these verses have shaped all this. I think it's fair to say that, as you said, there's thousands of pages on each word of the Talmud. For some of them, I think it's probably written. People, it, it's hard for me to imagine that every one of those written just for sake of writing. People, I mean, people study this with
You
all.
do it because you seek truth. You seek
Yeah,
the
you
word of
seek.
God.
Yeah, so in a sense, right? You come from a tradition where you come from a tradition which values learning, which values that, putting the time of the work. And then why you when I see folks who study the Torah all day, that's remarkable. And then and then take classes in the evening. Now, it's not as if in Christianity people haven't done work. They've done. I mean, there's been scholarly work, but not the kind of work within congregations. I'm sure there are tons of faculty who've written all
Again,
kinds of books.
you're looking at it from a modern perspective. Like the world fell apart post Enlightenment about their attitudes towards religion, and I think the way that Catholicism has spread, or even Islam, is a thing of the past. A lot of times the only place where proselytization, these ideas are able to spread, are in unenlightened or uncultured people. And I think like this dichotomy between the cultured world and the religious world is really hit ahead, and it's really hard to see. So I think like when you look at the past, it's really easy to see people who really took these texts seriously. And I think the early church fathers are great examples. And even when you get to medieval, St. Thomas Aquinas really tried to kind of work out every single thing. But I feel like if you talk to a Catholic father or a preacher today, there's not like this. There's not this attitude that I need to work it all out. There's not an attitude that I have to have a holistic attitude towards Christianity. It's more like I got to push social justice. I got to push this idea. I got to push, almost
So,
like they have like their attitude towards it. And I'll be honest, like you don't see pastors a lot of kind of being rooted in the text in the general sense, at least the ones I interact with. I know, I don't want to speak generally, but read in text, I think in the way that the medievals would have been.
yeah, I think that's a fair critic. I think that's a very fair observation. Now, what I will say is, well, thank you for sharing that. The reason why I care about social justice is because of Matthew, and because of Matthew. When I read Matthew, I
Yeah, but
cannot.
social justice because they love Bernie Sanders
Uh,
and they love because that's their Jewish leader these days. And again, there's different attitudes. Whenever a text exists, the question is the text should it be interpreted according to the modern cultural light? Okay, Isaac, I think we'll call that a day,
yeah, thank
and
you.
to be continued.